Kathy Southern here with Studio Cat Designs, and today we're going to talk about finishing off a project. Now, you can have all the time in the world and make the most beautiful project, but if you don't finish it off well, that's all people are going to notice. In specific, today, let's talk about bias tape. First, let's talk about the reason why we use bias tape and why we cut it on the bias to begin with. Here's a piece of fabric that's obviously been cut on the straight. And here's the same fabric cut on the bias. As you can tell, we chose a print so you could tell that it was cut on the bias. Now for the fabric that's cut on the straight, if you pull it, if you yank it, if you try to stretch it, it will not. This is cotton. It's not going to give. It's very strong, and you can hear that snap. This is the same fabric cut on a bias. And if you notice, you can pull it. You can stretch it. And it doesn't have the same strength. And that's because the fabric's been cut on the bias. The fibers themselves on either end have been split, and it's lost a lot of its strength. There's strength in number, there's strength in length, and this fabric has been compromised on purpose. It works to our advantage when we use bias tape. If you try to match this curved edge to a straight piece of fabric that has no give in it, you're going to get bacon edges. You're going to get those rumples and bumps along the edges, and that's what people call and complain about. They'll say, Kathy, how do you get your bias tape on so smoothly? And if you'll notice on this project, the edge is smooth. There are no bacon edges. It goes down smooth. And I'm going to show you today, quick and easy way for you to be able to finish off every one of your projects with bias tape. Smooth. No one's ever going to notice your bias tape because, let's face it, the only place people really notice bias tape is when it looks bad. So let's continue on from here. We've got this project that we've set up. I set it up on purpose for this very reason. All right? From now on, we're going to be closed in, and we're going to show you how to apply your bias tape in such a way that it's smooth and gorgeous. Okay, so we got our bias tape prepared, and for a project like this, I usually cut my bias tape about 1¼ inch wide, and then I press 1/4 inch of a seam on one side. Press 1/4 over, wrong sides together, and now your bias tape is ready. Now, I will say this, if I'm doing purses, and there sometimes the edges are thick, you've got a lot of fabric. This is very thin. It's just 2 pieces of cotton with a little fusible fleece. This is fine. But if you're using a purse, I mean, let's face it, sometimes those edges are pretty thick. You've got a lot of layers, especially if you've done any embellishing at all. In those cases, sometimes I'll cut it 1½, sometimes even 1¼ inch. I mean, 1¾ inch wide. So just bear that in mind. So in order to start, what I always do is clip off this end. You want it nice and straight. And we're going to start our project. Doesn't matter where you start it. For this particular project, it's a circular thing. No matter where you start it, there's no end, no beginning. On other projects, you might want to start it in an area where it doesn't quite show so much. But I'm going to show you how to finish this off that it won't even matter if it does. So at first, you're going to fold over, I'd say about 1 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, and you'll fold it over like this. Not even. You do not want the folded edges even. I usually fold it a little off center, and I'll show you why. On an angle. Lay it right across along your edge. Now, that's your first one. Now, as you lay it, I pull it just a little bit. Notice I am not cranking down on this thing, pulling it as hard as it'll pull. But I am giving it a little tug at every pin site. We're going to do this all the way around the edge. If you pull too tight, you're actually going to affect the width of your bias tape. And you're going to make it too thin, too tight, too taut, and it's going to be hard to work with. But for each pin site, which I usually put about 1 inch apart, I'm an advocate of using a lot of pins, ladies. No sense getting chintzy over this. With each pin site, you're going to give it a little bit of a tug. So it's going to be very tight. Okay? I'm going to continue doing this, and we'll come back in a minute when I'm done. I want to show you how I finish off the end. Now, I'm going to stop the video and just turn it around for a second so you can really see how I've started this off. And as you can see, this top edge is not even with this edge of this folded edge of the bias tape. It's angled downward, and we're going to continue on pulling our bias tape as we get it even with our outside edges. Okay, now we've got all our bias tape on. It's been all stitched in place, and you can notice that a magical thing is already starting to happen. See how the edges are turning up? It's because we tightened it up around the edges, and see, it's already not even laying flat. This is good. Believe me, this is a good sign. Now from here, we want to take our scissors, and we want to trim this edge to about 1/8 of an inch from the seam. Take your time, because you certainly don't want to be cutting out over onto your stitching. So take your time, trim this edge so it's within 1/8 of an inch of our stitching, and then we'll continue. Okay, now comes the exciting part. Now is when we're going to see the fruit of our labor. If you flip your project over, you'll find that the bias tape virtually does all your work for you. If you pull it all out, look, it's flipping right over the edge all by itself. All we really have to do is just pin it in place and stitch it. Look, I mean, it basically lays there by itself. And the reason this is because we gave it a tug at each juncture, and it's just going to do so beautifully. Look at this side. You can see how great it's going to look. Now, let's look a little at this junction spot, because we're going to fix this up. So the first thing we'll do is get our lead piece, and this was our initial piece. And you can pull this edge up some, force this one down, so that they're basically even. Stuff this in here so you don't see that raw edge. The way I usually pin, because I like to do my stitching from the outside. Let's face it, no one's going to look around at this side of your project. Well, unless it's your mother, and she's going to be checking to see how you did, but at least my mother would. I usually like to pin it from this side. Now you want to make sure that it covers that stitching. I used pink on purpose so that you could see it. But see, and it does. You want to cover it in excess. And actually, probably the best way to stitch it is pin it is this way. That way your pins are there. You can yank them out prior to stitching over them, because they're going through quite a bit of layers here, and I don't know that they're going to give a whole lot underneath that presser foot, and you're going to break some needles if you try going over them at this point. Okay, just like that. And our junction spot. Now if I'd have had my druthers, I would rather have used black as my bias tape for this project. But black is a pretty sorry color to try to photograph, so I have used the pink since it'll show up so much better. Alright, you can see where that spot is, but from this side, see how that is? I mean, you can't detect it. Even your mom isn't going to be able to see it that well. Alright, so we'll just go all the way around the edge, pinning like this, and then when we flip it over, what I recommend doing is stitching in the ditch along this pink edge, and it's automatically, since it's automatically going to catch this seam down here all the way around the edge, and what we'll have is a beautifully bias taped project. So there we have it, ladies. As you can see, our project's finished. The edging is absolutely flat on either side. You don't see any bacon rumples and ridges. Everything's laying flat. Everything is laying smooth. It's a project that we would love to display ourselves or to give as a gift. Either way, it was easy as pie. So go and do likewise. Don't forget to give those little tugs on your bias tape, and I think you're going to find it's going to make all the difference in the way your project finishes. Happy sewing!